So here's the mandolin then. After 5 sessions of polishing with the undiluted French polish. And I suppose in all honesty, when you look at that, for many applications, that would probably be good enough. But of course, we luthiers, good enough doesn't do. We're always in this kind of pursuit of this unobtainable perfection. So I want to take this a little bit further. So now, from now on, everything's going to get even finer. So when I was cutting back those initial coats, I was using the 500 silicon carbide paper, which by many standards is really very, very fine. But it's not fine enough for what I want to do now. So I'm going to go over to 800 grit wet or dry paper. There's a temptation to start with a coarse paper and then gradually work down to finer paper. But I can't emphasise enough, you've got to have the patience to work all of the time with the fine paper, because what you don't want to do is use a coarse paper at this stage and put a scratch in the surface of the polish, because then what you've got to do is you've got to try to fill that scratch with more polish. So if you can use really fine abrasive papers, then you don't have to put as much polish on to compensate for what you've just rubbed off, if you like. So I'm going to be using the wet or dry paper, and I am going to actually be using it wet. Again, this is something that I've not always done. I've started to do that more recently. But when I say wet, I've got a little tub of water here, tiniest drop of washing up liquid. When I say wet, I kind of mean this. Yeah, a little dab like that. And all that's going to do is to help stop the paper from clogging. Because again, if the paper clogs and you get a little clump of shellac dust, that will be enough to scratch or mark the polish. It's very delicate at this stage, so you really got to treat it, you know, like respect. This is your little baby here, so you've got to look after it. So with a little dab of water on there, you can start sanding. What I'm aiming for is to get this now as flat as I possibly can, and every now and then with a piece of paper towel just wipe the surface to get rid of the excess moisture, because you don't want the water soaking into the surface. And then I always just sort of tip it in the light, and then you can see the shiny areas are where the polish is low, the dull flat areas are where you're actually sanding, and what you're aiming for is a dullness over the whole thing. So that's going to take me, I don't know, a good hour I'd imagine. So it's all been sanded with the 800 wet or dry, and before I start polishing it, I'm going to give the whole thing a once over with one of these abrasive pads, 1000 grade on this one, and that'll just take off any of the sort of the dusty residue, and make it really lovely and smooth prior to the next session of polishing. So I like to think of this now as a second phase of polishing. I've built up the body of shellac, and now I'm looking at the quality of the surface finish a little bit more. I'm changing the pad. I'm using a cotton wool ball instead of the cotton waste. The reason being, I think it holds the polish better, therefore you're more in control of what you're actually applying, and also I feel that you can push harder, and if you push harder you seem to get a flatter finish. The shellac itself, the French polish, I've diluted probably about 15%, something like that, with the methylated spirits or whatever solvent you're using, and so nice clean fresh pad, And these coats will go on very, very lightly. Once I've got the first coat on, or the first application all over it, I will then start putting a little bit of oil on the pad, and if I put oil on the pad whilst I'm polishing, right at the very end I'll do that process that you saw in the last video where I wipe over the instrument with the methylated spirits. And then I like to go in one direction. As I say, what I'm trying to do now is get a flat, shiny surface that's of good quality rather than building up quantity. And just wipe around the edges there, because what I don't want is too much of a build up on that edge. So that previous session of polishing, that's dry, and I'm cutting back yet again, but now I'm using 1200 wet or dry, and then followed by a combination of these abrasive pads, a 2000 grade and then a 4000 grade. So I don't know if you can see this, but that's the side after I've polished, and now if I turn it over, this is the side after I've cut back, and you can see that this is a dull sheen. It's lovely and flat. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over the whole instrument, already done the back, and then I'm going to put on the polish again very, very finely, and I'm going to repeat this process of cutting back, putting the polish on finely until I'm really happy with the surface. So really I'm into applying the last coats of the polish now, and these will be very light coats. What I'm doing now, I will probably only do 2 or 3 times before I cut it back with that fine abrasive again, and then go through this process again. And the idea is really trying to put back, if you like, the shine that I've just taken off with the abrasives. And I find this way I end up with a flat surface, very few marks from the pad itself, and then I can leave it to harden off confidently for a couple of weeks, knowing that when I come back to it, there's polish everywhere. So there it is. The French polishing process is really complete, and what's going to happen now is that the mandolin is just going to hang there in the workshop for about 2 weeks, maybe slightly longer, enough for the French polish to harden off so that I can safely assemble all the components onto the mandolin. It will need to be cut back a little bit with some very fine micro mesh, maybe about 12,000, something like that, and then it will be buffed with a burnishing cream, and then I always put some microcrystalline wax on it. So they will be the last stages of the mandolin. Now I know I've been a bit pedantic in these videos, and I'm sure some of you have found them tedious and boring, but all I've tried to do is to pass on to you some of the knowledge that I've built up over the last 10 years since the last videos, and hopefully, you know, there might be some tips in there that will help you with your polishing. I'm not saying that this is the definitive way, the best way. It's my way and it works for me, and maybe there's something that you can take from that. The one thing that I will say to you though, as a sort of a closing statement, is that whatever finish you use, the largest component of that finish is time and patience. There's no quick, easy finish on a musical instrument. I've tried quite a few, I know that. Anyway, until next time, you take care and see you soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.